Hey, everybody. So for those of you who are unaware, this is a workshop. That means the council does its homework. Public can be here, although there won't be public comments. Let's do roll call. I see the city attorney has just walked in. City administrator, George, Pam, Paloma, Lee, Amber, Jeff, Molly, we're all here. Anyone online with the city? I don't think so, right? Correct. And I see our city planner, Natalie Quinn. Thank you for coming. We're expecting our Fishkill Avenue Committee Chair, J.C. Calderon, I assume will be here. Okay, let's do the first item and get the chief home. So this is the appointment of Anthony Lombardo, the position of police officer. You're going to tell us about it.
Good evening. It's nice to be here again. I'm very pleased to be here to propose the hiring of another person for the position of police officer in the police department. Anthony James Lombardo is 24 years old. He resided in this area his whole life and been born and raised in Cold Spring, New York, where he attended Haldane High School, or everything school. Anthony's currently a police officer in the NYPD, and prior to that, he worked as a laborer and a carpenter and as a foreman for a property management firm. He's also engaged in significant volunteer work in his community, to include preparing meals for a local homeless shelter, as well as participating in the Polar Plunge to raise money for the Special Olympics. As with all of our candidates, Mr. Lombardo passed our background check process, which includes interviewing neighbors and associates, checking into the individual's finances and social media, checking into their criminal and domestic and academic and employment history.
Tom, can you turn your mic on?
Is it off, or did I just not have it well?
I don't know. I don't see the red, and Ben said he's having trouble hearing you. Okay, that one doesn't turn off. Keep going, sorry.
Okay. Might have just been aimed poorly.
That's better.
Okay.
Yeah.
Do you want me to go through it for the
Keep
record?
going. You're good.
Okay. Domestic and academic and employment history, and among other things, passing a rigorous psychological and polygraph exam. We're looking forward to bringing Officer Lombardo on board soon and continuing to address our staffing shortfalls as rapidly as we can.
So with this, did we miss the window for the upcoming academy?
So he would not need to attend the academy because he
okay.
would be what's called a resignation reinstatement. He already has one.
Okay.
What we would have to do is send him to a few weeks of what's called a conversion course.
Okay, and there's no like set time, like that's something that
There'll
runs
be one
often?
coming up. Orange County and Rockland County both do them. They're a couple of weeks long.
Okay,
And would there then be field training after that, or depends
He'll
on?
actually, when he starts, he'll start field training right away.
Okay, so
So-
he can do those two things concurrently, it sounds like.
Yeah. That just has to, the conversion course just has to be done within a year.
oh, great.
All right.
It's exciting that there's somebody else so soon after the other two appointments, so hopefully this is the trend.
I am pretty pleased. We had 2 more resumes sent to us, so
Okay, great, good.
we're hopeful for those.
As we talked about it last time, any updates on when the test results from the last test in the fall will be released, or you're still waiting?
Not yet.
No. Oh, okay, great, thank you.
All right, any other questions?
No, so Mr. Lombardo will be here next week for you
All
to
right.
meet him.
All right. Thank you all so much. I'll see you next week.
Thank you.
Try, get home safely. I know it's a long ways. Yeah. Okay. Next one. So, by the way, I think the council knows this. There's some fairly meaty stuff on this agenda. We may not get through it all, but let's start up. What I would suggest we do is, do we want to dispense with items 5, 6, 7 and get them out of the way? Would that be all right with council? Because I believe those are pretty quick, right?
Yes.
Yep.
And do you need a motion? Do I need a motion?
It is an agenda, so yes.
All right, so,
Motion to move items 5, 6, and 7 to next items on the agenda.
and a
Second.
second. So that's Molly and Amber, all in favor, aye?
Aye.
Thank you very much. Okay, so let's get the easy ones, and then we'll have the meaty discussions to follow. So this is, the next one's the appointment of Corey Worthman to the position of acting building inspector. Chris, you want to start that one?
Sure. This is tentative, and we put it on because, as you know, our building inspector, Bruce Flower, is going back to work for the town of Poughkeepsie. He was a deputy there. He's now taking the building inspector position. And we have a deputy building inspector who is going to be acting as the building inspector, and we're still determining with civil service what steps we need to take. So I just wanted to put this on in case we need to bring him to you next week. He's fully qualified to do the job. He did it in Ulster County, and as we look for a permanent candidate, he would be filling in some capacity. So if we do declare him acting building inspector, which may be necessary, then we'll have more information on him next week. And you did hire him not too long ago, maybe 6 months ago we hired him, and he's been fabulous.
Is the question for civil service like whether he can serve as the acting building inspector or whether he needs to remain as deputy? Like, what are we trying to determine?
He actually can do a lot of the things that the building inspector does just as deputy in the absence of the building inspector. What we're trying to figure out is if we have to create a position of acting, what that would mean in terms of pay.
Okay.
So we have some stuff to work out, but if we do this, we would need to do it next week, and I wanted to at least get it on your radar.
Okay.
So we're in the process of collecting more information.
Chris, could you describe who else is in the building department, just staffing-wise, just so we have a sense of?
Yeah, you have another deputy building inspector. You have the person that oversees planning and zoning, and then there is a administrative assistant, and I don't know his exact title. But you have 5 in that department, and we're losing the head of it.
Can we expect any slowdowns in, building permits being issued or anything like that?
Hopefully not. We'll do our best to make the transition seamless, and again, I think Bruce has left the department a lot stronger than he found it. He's mostly caught up. We had a big backlog from COVID when he came in. I think he has more staff now than we had previously, so the staff can carry a lot of it forward. Some of the things that we might elect to do that we don't have to do, we may have to delay a few months while the next person gets up to speed. But I don't think the permits, will slow down a lot.
Yeah, we added a position a couple of budgets ago, or the last budget, I forget which, one or the other, and that's the one that Corey filled. I think we'd be in a harder shape if we didn't have that position, but I think with it, I think it gives us a little bit of backstop. Doesn't mean we can't, we don't need to fill the slot. We do, but we have some room now.
And not directly related to this, but sort of, I'd spoken with Bruce a few months ago, and I know he was requesting a large format scanner to document all of old plans and various stuff like that. And I don't know if that was included in the budget.
It was.
It was?
Yeah, and he hasn't had a chance to buy it, so it's still forthcoming.
Good, because he implied to me that was going to really help
Yes.
executing the permit.
Yeah, it's still in the plans to buy it.
Okay, everybody all right? I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, that's okay. This is a request, I guess, for any person who's leaving us. I assume that if anything relevant comes up in Bruce's exit interview, if it's relevant to hiring the next person, that would be incorporated by Sarah.
I will leave that up to Sarah.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It sounds like Bruce is leaving just because there's a bigger opportunity in a bigger city.
Yeah, and
but still, if there's anything relevant.
He was in that position for 18 years, and then the person above him retired. So we basically borrowed him for 2.5 years from the town of Poughkeepsie. He also will focus more on the building aspect and less on zoning and planning, because they break that down between multiple staff. So they have a person who oversees planning and zoning. He'll do building, then they have a code enforcement person. He's kind of all 3 of those here.
Right.
So
They're a bigger city than us.
Yeah, they're 3 times our size.
The town.
And the town of Poughkeepsie, plus they've just got a ton of the commercial, right, because they got a very, very large section of Route 9. So,
If he does become acting, I don't think we met him in person, because that's not our approach, our procedure with deputies, but if he does become acting head or head, if we're able to meet him either as a public session or executive session, just to kind of get to know him, as we did with Bruce, kind of like have a just kind of ability for the council to kind of get to know him, I think would be
I'll have to
good.
check his availability. He's also a
Yeah.
fire chief.
Yeah, okay.
And has a lot of commitments.
Yeah.
Maybe it's not necessary for us to vote
Yeah.
on him.
No, it's
but
not
at
necessary for
some
next
point-
week, sorry, to be clear, I'm just thinking because we did get a chance to meet other heads of departments who
Well,
are
I
new,
would just
so-
say probably the permanent person we would bring in to meet, of course, or do that in executive session. But for an acting, I wouldn't necessarily.
Yeah, I'll
think
defer
that's-
to you once you learn more about how long he might be acting for, and that might also dictate what seems appropriate, both from a practical and from a legal perspective, so.
And then, Chris, I'm sorry if you said this and I missed it, but what will the hiring process be for the
We have a civil service list for the position. We're canvassing that list right now, which has 7 qualified candidates on it. And we'll see if anyone on the list is a person we want to hire, and then we will see if we need to stick with the list or we are able to break the list and then consider other candidates.
Great,
Okay,
yes.
all right. That's that one. And then the second one is renewing our lease license agreement with Cornell Cooperative. Nick, you want to tell us what's in that?
Thank you, Mayor. So this is a license agreement with Cornell Cooperative for use of certain space within a recreation center. There's a figure attached to this license agreement detailing that space as well as the scope of the use. It's in connection with Cornell's Green Teens program, and this is a license agreement for a 1-year term running a calendar year, so it's retroactive to January 1st of this year through December 31st. And it also provides for 4 renewals by the city administrator. And the particulars are they're paying a monthly rent of $350 a month, payable in one lump sum for $3,000. The agreement provides for all the required insurance and also provides that if it's needed for another public use or necessary at the discretion of a recreation director, that the agreement can be terminated.
Is there anything that's different about this contract, other than it being renewal from what we've had with them previously?
Not substantively, it's still the same use is my understanding, and we've just added some additional requirements on insurance and just updated it for best practices. But the use remains the same,
Thank you.
And the terms are the same.
yes.
Were there any other nonprofits that were interested in using the facilities? Like, I don't, how did this process come about?
They've been doing this since before I got here in early 2021. If groups want to use the facilities, Mark talks with them and tries to accommodate them. But this is a more permanent, regular presence because they run the Green Teen right out of this. So that directly benefits Beacon teens, preteens, and they use the facility.
Any other comments on this one? Okay.
The one comment I wanted to make, we need a new aerial shot of the rec center, because there was no pavilion there.
Oh, okay.
All right. And then the last one is just an update on our ADU application.
Yes,
Chris?
I just wanted to let you know that we have partnered with Hudson River Housing, which is the lead on the grant, and 7 other municipalities in the county, the towns of Amenia, Northeast, Pine Plains, town of Poughkeepsie, Stanford, Unionvale, and the village of Rhinebeck. Hudson River Housing has applied for $6 million under the governor's $85 million initiative to help low and moderate income homeowners develop accessory dwelling units in their homes. This would be for approximately 45 units between the 8 municipalities. It's a 2-year grant, and it can provide up to $125,000 per homeowner. That's to help with architectural fees, permitting fees, construction, and legal fees. Typically, that, they think that should cover about 70% of the cost of adding these, depending on how they're done. And it would be for garage conversions, for standalone ADUs, or for things like basement apartments. We're excited. We hope they award this, and then the city would basically just help to get the information out. Hudson River Housing would administrate it, and they would get an administrative fee that's quite small. They only propose 3.3% administrative fees, and then they would do all of the monitoring. So there's a 10-year period that they would monitor. The people who would qualify for these are any homeowner that makes 100% of the AMI or less. So it's a broad range of people, and I think it'd be a bit of a challenge to try to get all 45 in the county. So, but I'm hopeful that we can do our share in Beacon.
I think so. First of all, this is really great news. I'm glad to see, I know this is something that we talked about, this grant program for the LMI folks, and so I'm glad to see that we're able to realize that. But I think the next step for the council is to think about our ADU probably process specifically. I've heard very pointedly from people that have tried to go through this process that it is very expensive and time consuming, and it would really be a shame to me if this funding was this grant funding was taken up by paperwork as opposed to construction. And so I would love for the council to think about how we can alleviate some of that burden while still making sure that we've got the right checks and balances. For example, I think Kingston had some kind of preset parameters or plans, and if you were within those plans, then it was a little bit of an easier process. So I would love to have us have a conversation so that people get the full benefit of this grant.
And Natalie and I spoke about that before the meeting, so I think she can help explore the tools you have in your toolbox to do that.
That would be great. Thank you.
And Nick and I also talked about it from the perspective of possibly waiving certain fees.
Yeah.
So I'm going to leave that conversation to Natalie,
Yep.
but that's a good beginning, and we'll just start.
Yeah, for sure. This seems like the right time for us to kind of think about the policy we have behind this. And as I said, I just think it would be a shame if somebody who is an LMI applicant got this grant application and just had to spend tons of it on, paperwork.
Agreed.
So this program is taking applicants now, or Hudson River Housing is kind of asking the state for it, and it's not yet open for applicants?
No, they've applied. So there was a notice of funding announcement, and I think this is the second or third. They put in an application. It looked good because the state came back and said, we want you to apply for more.
Okay.
Originally they were going to apply for $2 million. They ended up applying for $6 million. And that was at the state's request. Okay. So our hope is that they're going to turn it around quickly because they want to generate new housing units, and they probably need to get the money out the door because this started in the 2022-2023 New York State capital budget.
Right. Yeah, the reason why I asked the question is because I believe they might be coming before the city council for another reason next week, and I wonder if it's appropriate for them to at least touch on this program, even if they're not yet fully approved and be able to take applications yet. So, and I also appreciate it might be different people running the different things we're talking about, but if there's a way to combine those two, that would be a great opportunity to get the word out in our community.
I'll let Mary Ling know, who I think is going to come next week.
Great.
And then just to summarize what the governor's proposal is in this area is there's two means testing for an accessory dwelling unit. The state is willing to make funds available to homeowners who are means tested, meaning that, they don't exceed a certain income because they don't need the money. But if the homeowner is then qualified, the funds are then used to develop an accessory dwelling unit, and as a result, the rents for those units will be subject to also a means testing and a limitation, right? And so that's kind of the benefit the state's offering, which is for those who need the funds to renovate their home, you can get those funds, but if you do,
Mayor,
that's not the program?
At all.
No, I'm sorry.
So the
Can you correct me then?
program actually has no mandatory income for the people living in the unit unless the applicant has proposed that, and they have not.
Okay, so the homeowner has no limitation of income.
But the homeowner has the limitation. So if the homeowner makes more than 100% of AMI, they are not eligible.
Okay.
The tenant, there's no means test.
Okay, sorry, I didn't realize that.
It's
So
with
it's
the assumption that this is kind of naturally
affordable.
affordable.
Got it, okay. Good, thank you for correcting me on that. So, that's what I just wanted to make sure the public heard. Okay, thank you.
And we do, I think our current laws prohibit short-term rentals in ADUs? Is that
And I
correct?
believe the funding does as
Yeah,
well.
the funding is
Okay.
very clear.
Right.
That would knock it right out of the program.
Great, thank you.
Right, and we needed someone to administer, which is why we went to Hudson River Housing, and we were the first ones to, talk to them, and they beat the bushes and got some others.
Yeah,
So
it's
we were
great to
pleased.
hear about other places that are also interested in this
Yeah.
as well.
Okay. That's that. Do you want to do the quick update on the TIP grant that you just applied for? Or do you want to do that another
I
time?
can do a quick, we just applied for a Transportation Improvement Program grant for Beekman Street for a project called Beekman Street Pedestrian and Bicycle Improvements. We have applied for $3 million of a $3.8 million project to put new sidewalks on both sides of the street, develop bike lanes, and also resurface the street and do drainage work. A lot like we're doing on Fishkill Teller with the drainage. The grant probably won't be awarded till the summer, so we'll have a better idea then. And we had strong support from, we had a letter from the CAC, from Scenic Hudson, from Dutchess Tourism, and Assemblymember Jacobson and Senator Rollison. So we're hopeful that we can get the money. It's an 80-20 split, and it would take us, we'd first do a design process, then we'd do construction, so it's a multi-year process.
All right, and this is for the section of Beekman from the train station up to Main Street.
Yes.
Okay, great.
And by train station, you mean kind of roughly across from Ferry
Red Flint
Street?
Drive
Red
up
Flint
to
Drive,
Main.
okay, up to
Yeah,
then.
So it's
Great.
just over half a mile.
Great, thank you.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, that's that. Now let's go back to the items at the top. And let's start with, we've got two that are zoning related, one Fishkill Avenue specific, and then the other one is I brought up the memo that Natalie did last year, mid-year, on housing-related zoning that we could do. And we'll start through those. And the third one after that is a priorities document. If we, and I'm assuming we'll have a rich discussion on the first two, we may not get to the third. If we don't, I'll tell you how to read it, and then we'll pick it up the next time, all right? And so on Fishkill Avenue concepts, I did one thing before you start, or you can start, and then I just want to add what was in the comprehensive plan on Route 52, because that I wanted to make sure the council heard, and we didn't ask you to do that, so I just looked it up myself, and as you know, it's not a lot, but I just want to make sure we cover it, so I have the material here.
Did you want to start with that, or do you want me to?
Is that okay?
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay. Yeah, so in our 2017 comprehensive plan, which always should be our starting point, Route 52 does not have a lot of stuff in there. On page 67, and again, I can read the entire thing. It says Route 52, it says maintain existing retail and service mix while improving the character of the area through pedestrian amenities such as sidewalks, street trees, improved architectural design. And then it has a couple of steps after that, which is require property owners, and I'm summarizing and skipping some phrases, to provide sidewalks, street trees, improved architectural design during site plan review. And then the other one is explore funding opportunities to provide streetscape amenities, including sidewalks, trees, benches, sheltered bus stops, bike racks, information kiosks. And that's kind of the extent of it. There was recommended zoning changes in the 2017 comp plan, most of which we've done. There were two that kind of vaguely related to this. One was in Groveville Mills, which was a light industrial zone to make that Fishkill Creek development. What we actually did was we made the section where the brick houses are, we made that, I think, R15, and then we made the section behind it Fishkill Creek development. And then the other thing that was related to it was a proposal to remove heavy industry, the HI zoning, which we have done except for the railroad tracks. That's kind of the only exception there. So I just wanted to provide that backdrop of what's there, and then I'll turn it over to Natalie.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And we also have J.C. Calderon, who is the chair of the Fishkill Avenue Committee, so I can start, J.C., and then orient, and we can jump in together. So yes, the committee, we actually did start with reviewing the comprehensive plan and did note that the language was a little light in there in terms of guidance, and there has been discussion that if some of the zoning recommendations move forward, you know, it's very light on language with housing and things like that, so we do recommend that there may potentially be updates to the comprehensive plan because your code should always be in alignment with that, right? So the committee is aware of that, and they would be recommending language for the comp plan if they felt that some of their recommendations were not explicitly outlined in the comp plan. So I'll just kind of orient us to the letter. There are the mayor's there are 4 zoning specific recommendations that we can go through. I just want to, you know, in the top paragraph, the committee is thinking about a broad range of zoning and non-zoning recommendations, and the committee members felt that that was really important to kind of note that there's a wide range of things. This is a very kind of focused area that you're seeing here in this memo. So they are looking at things like access points to the future rail trail, connecting to Madawan Road, housing, both affordable and market rate, appropriateness of ground floor residential uses along the corridor, complete streets designs that include options like continuous sidewalks, bike lanes, additional landscaping, bioretention for stormwater management, and on-street parking within the city's right-of-way. And they're also looking at things like building heights and protection of public scenic view sheds, amongst other things. So I kind of wanted to orient, the committee really felt it was important to show this full breadth of things that we're looking at. And then the other thing that I will say in terms of orienting for the zoning and land use recommendations, the committee felt that in general the corridor does have zoning districts which facilitate a wide range of uses. But the committee is crafting kind of a longer term vision for the corridor which promotes smart growth practices, pedestrian scale, housing, and higher quality design, as was kind of referenced in the comp plan. And so with that vision in mind, that's where these zoning recommendations are stemming from. And there are 4 individual recommendations. Each one, as you go through the memo, has kind of a short justification for why that's being considered, as well as the potential recommendation for language. So I'll just run through those quickly and cut me off if you want to jump in at all. Recommendation 1 is with regards to self-storage facilities. So while the committee recognizes that there's a need on some level for this use, and there actually is an existing self-storage facility in the lofts in an existing structure, the committee feels that due to the low number of employment opportunities that these businesses provide, as well as kind of the documented lack of contributions that they provide for creating the vibrant corridor that is at the heart of the vision for this area, the committee does recommend that self-storage businesses they would have to be separated from wholesale, other warehousing and things like that, and that they be prohibited in the corridor. On a similar thread, so 3 of these have to do with use, and then 1 of them has to do with kind of design placement. So the second recommendation, the committee has similar concerns regarding drive-through components. So these uses typically focus on auto-centric design and are considered detrimental to pedestrian safety. They often create congested kind of traffic patterns with cars entering and exiting at various angles, which lead to increased risk of collision with pedestrians. So with the evolution of the corridor, kind of keeping in mind that we're looking at this pedestrian scale vision, the committee recommends that drive-through facilities, standalone or used in connection with other uses, be expressly prohibited within all the districts along the corridor. Right now in the city of Beacon, they are only discussed really in the Main Street corridor, in the Main Street zoning district as being prohibited, and it's kind of, the code is silent elsewhere. It's not, either expressly permitted or prohibited, and so the committee felt that that should be made clear. I'm going to skip 3 and go to 4 because that also has to do with use, and we'll go back to 3. So recommendation 4, the committee has similar concerns as those noted in recommendations 1 and 2 with regards to other auto-oriented uses, gas filling stations, car wash, vehicle sales, auto body, and repair. So the committee feels that the existing active auto-oriented uses within the corridor should be permitted to remain under the code as existing non-conforming uses. However, a change to the zoning should prohibit these uses so that they can be phased out over time. And then Jumping back up to recommendation 3, this one has to do with front yard setbacks and the location of parking. So the committee looked a lot at the application that went through the planning board a few years ago for 397 Fishkill Avenue, which kind of has the building up to the sidewalk, which is landscaping in front of it. Parking is located behind. They felt that that was a really successful design, and that starts to create the pedestrian scale and narrow kind of, right now we have a lot of existing buildings set back behind kind of open parking areas. So the committee, they feel like the building sitting back behind expanses of asphalt and parking detracts from the walkability and the vitality of the corridor, disrupting the street wall, and prioritizing vehicle access over pedestrian access. So the committee recommends reducing the minimum front yard setback within the GB district from 15 to 10, and that you add language to require that parking be put behind. And this language exists elsewhere in the code. So what's recommended is that all parking shall be located behind, underneath, or to the side of a building. If to the side, parking shall be screened by a low wall, hedge, or other landscaping to kind of maintain the continuity of the street. Okay. The one other thing I will say before I pass this over to JC to add any other bits is this was not a unanimous decision. It was almost unanimous by the committee, but there were members of the committee who are business owners who felt that the prohibition of uses could be detrimental to existing businesses and property owners on the corridor. And the planning board also voiced some concern about that, about where else would these uses, if outrightly prohibited, where else would they be permitted in the city of Beacon, and that should be considered further. So I did just want to note those pieces of kind of dissent, and not that we're a legal briefing here, but dissent from the opinion. And then also the committee is very focused on, we still want to kind of vet these with the public, these recommendations. So these are initial priority recommendations right now, but the committee is in the process, and JC can talk a little bit more about this, about organizing. We did a lot of public engagement during the summer, kind of as pop-ups and things like that, but we want to do another engagement to specifically kind of talk about these recommendations with the public and get their feedback further, because some of them are pretty significant changes.
Should we hold questions, or should we jump into JC?
Yeah, happy to take some questions.
Well, I'm curious about the discussion that was had about how the detrimental nature of that decision, if we're having any exclusions for the existing businesses. Was there a discussion about why that would be detrimental to those businesses?
I think the general conversation is about what the market is currently kind of providing as potential tenants for these spaces right now, and it's in a transition period, right? This area is very auto-oriented right now, and has been historically. So I think the conversation was that it could potentially preclude some of these businesses from being occupied in the short term. That, I don't know if you felt like there was another justification made, but I think that was...
Because they'd have to vacate and come back?
Well, what's the question, Jeff?
About why the decisions, if there was zoning decisions to exclude certain types of business that are already there, car wash, fueling station, why would it be detrimental if this zoning change was made to existing businesses?
You mean why some people on the committee felt that?
Yeah, what was the discussion? Was there evidence from other locations where something similar happened and it did prove detrimental to those businesses? I'm really curious.
My sense is that the dissenter, felt that we hadn't really reached out to enough businesses to get their sense of their point of view. Although we've welcomed everyone publicly for months now, and anybody can, come to reach out to us. But I think the part of the equation might be that some people have different understanding of how zoning works, and there might be a perception that things happen maybe sooner than it would. In other words, some people, didn't understand that existing businesses would be grandfathered in and wouldn't be necessarily affected by any zoning update. So there's in part, perhaps misunderstanding, not necessarily by this committee member, but just by people in general. There's a kind of, I think there's more communication has to be done as to the implications of a zoning update.
And I'll just add one thing. I think just trying to put myself in their shoes, I think there's a thought that these are viable business options that provide services to members of the community, and they have to be located somewhere. And that this may be one of the last corridors in the city that allows some of these uses. And so by changing this zoning and prohibiting them, they're left to, they could continue to operate, right? If you're an existing business, you can continue to operate, but that we would remove the opportunity for new businesses like this to come in, which I think some would argue serve purposes for the community. Many people own a car that needs, that needs repair at some point. So I think just trying to put myself.
No, I appreciate it. And just the clarification is because, as described in the recommendation, they would be grandfathered in, so it could be an advantage if no other businesses, no other competition was allowed. So I'm really just interested to hear more about how this would be detrimental to affect our decision.
So, yeah, I listened into some of the conversations. My impression is and correct me if I'm wrong, but I think you would have gotten consensus if the changes were more gradual or phased in, as opposed to we'll jump to what we think the pedestrian-friendly solution will be. Because that would say, you might do, instead of auto-oriented, you might kind of phase them out over time, as opposed to saying, tomorrow they're gone, because the area is not terribly pedestrian-oriented at the moment, isn't going to be for some period of time. And so jumping to the solution as opposed to getting there gradually, I think would have gotten others on board.
But the current proposal of grandfathering those changes in, does that not accomplish what you just said?
Well, that you have to do regardless.
Yeah, I mean,
Right.
they essentially, if we were to say, this is no longer permitted in this zone, it's not like you can just show up tomorrow and kick them out of their business. Like, it just becomes a non-conforming use. So I don't really, appreciate the perspective. Obviously, any change that we make has to have a public hearing, and they're certainly welcome to voice any concerns at that point in time. I just don't see that as something that, is overly concerning to me at the moment. Especially as what we're looking at, and JC, I want to thank you and the committee specifically. After you came here at the end of the year, the council agreed that we would really like to see some very tactical suggestions, and I appreciate the work that went into getting these in front of us, so thank you very much. I also really see this as an opportunity for us to actually allow the committee to continue their work and give us an opportunity to envision a more pedestrian-friendly, better designed kind of corridor. So I see this as a very important mid-step that enables that future vision to actually come to life. And I think in looking at this proposal, two things are really incredibly simple to me, and I feel very non-controversial about them, is recommendation 1 and 2. And those seem like really straightforward changes. The language in here is I'm perfectly comfortable with, and I would be very happy to move those forward in terms of our process to make changes. And as I have stated multiple times, I would like to do that expeditiously.
I'd like further clarification on the grandfathering and the existing non-conforming. Like, say, Healy closed and they have since rented it to Carvana. That would be allowed. The same owner wouldn't have to continue on. If a gas station could sell the right to operate a gas station there. Yes. So it doesn't preclude those continuing on. It just doesn't allow further uses like that.
Correct.
Well,
It doesn't allow new uses to come within the district, but the existing ones can continue to be operated. They can sell it to a new owner, and within reason, they can also do some limited expansions or modifications to their building footprint and buildings.
They would be able to do some expansion?
They would. There's always that question with non-conforming uses, are they expanding the use? It's a fact-intensive one, but it prohibits any new uses coming in. It allows the existing ones to continue, both. Thank you. So, I always thought I had a loud voice. Thank you, though. So, the non-conforming prohibits new uses from being established. It allows the existing ones to continue on that property. It allows it to be sold and transferred to a new owner. And it also, if it's discontinued, I think in Beacon it's for 6 months or more, then it ceases to continue. So if you had a gas station and they stopped for 6 months and we wanted to recontinue in the 7th month, they wouldn't be permitted to reestablish that use. And there are abilities to make minor modifications or changes because the law recognizes that you can modernize, you don't have to go stale. So if there's now a requirement to have an electric charging station at a gas station, you could put the electric charging station in.
I think the distinction is that you're not allowed to increase the nonconformity, but you are allowed to do something that would change the building, but as long as it's not deemed as increasing the nonconformity.
Right, the intensity of the use.
So just to follow George's question, how does that 6 months work? And I'll give you an example. We had a two-family on Church Street in an R1 that had a fire, and as a result, how much time do they have to rebuild the house before the non-conforming use has to go away? You said 6 months. Is it 6 months from what to what?
So I'll pull the code up because it varies from municipality to municipality, so I don't want to misspeak. But in some situations, if the non-conforming use is destroyed by a fire, you cannot recontinue it.
Yep.
If you make a modification that is 50% or more, you cannot continue it. So I'd have to look at Beacon specific. I was just saying that if you discontinue it, like changing, you don't have a buyer, so you go out of business for 7 months, you could not pick up the use. But if there's a change to the business and that the building is completely torn on fire and burned down, then you can't reestablish that use.
So I hear, at least from my thinking, a trade-off, which is if we're going to enact zoning, that's where we're wanting to get to over 10 or 20 years now, I would like that 6 month or the non-conforming use opened up to allow some flexibility in there. If we make it tight, then I don't want the changes for a while. If we loosen it up and say, you get a year to lose a non-conforming use, I get a lot more comfortable saying, okay, let's go with the zoning, that's where we want to get to in 20 years, even though we're not there right now. All right, so that's the trade-off I see on that one.
Well, I am definitely in favor of the recommendation 2 for numerous reasons, especially when you consider the emissions that a drive-through causes, and that it's, looking in the future, we're going to have a rail trail, and to have emissions happening right where people are walking in nature seems to go against itself. The traffic issue is another consideration, and it's clear that these parcels can't handle drive-throughs in listening to what's happening right now. And as for the autos, I'm somewhat sensitive to it because there are at least 18 parcels in this area right now that either in the past 2 years have had auto-related or currently are in the business with auto-related. So I feel the majority have been auto-centric, that I think it does have to be sensitive, and I could agree with Lee on looking at that's a future, but not right now to say that.
Yeah, my point continues to be that I think that we are quickly losing our window to take advantage of the wonderful things that the committee is recommending. When you ran through some of the long-term visions for this, they're wonderful. I think that would be such a positive for our community. And if we do not take some quick action to tactically prevent some uses that we know do not align to that vision, then what's the point of having the vision? You might as well just stop what you're doing.
Well, I only hear that in one very specific one. The only one that I'm hearing is a drive-through. I'm not hearing anything else as sort of occurring in the moment that's going to somehow preclude us from doing something.
I'd also be happy to just move recommendation 2 forward. I have no problem with that. I think the recommendation of getting rid of self-storage is a good one because of the market behind people kind of gobbling up these parcels and making them into self-storage. I can see that being something that somebody wants to do, and the points made here are very valid. It's a low number of employment. There's not a lot of really, it does not contribute to the vibrant corridor that's being envisioned here. So no problem with either, but I would certainly prioritize recommendation 2.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess the question is, can we do that, and how do we do that, and how do we put this? on the
Here's
agenda.
what go ahead.
I was going to say procedurally, so our office would prepare a draft local law you can consider at a workshop meeting. Once you've determined it's where you want it to be, we would then schedule a public hearing. It would be referred to the planning board for a report and recommendation, as well as to the county planning board for a report and recommendation. After you receive their reports, you would then schedule a public hearing, close it, and then deliberate and then vote on it.
And when is the next planning board and county review cycle?
They generally do it within 30 days,
Okay.
and we can get it on to the next planning board meeting
Yeah.
after you introduce it.
And if you recall why we asked the committee to come up with some recommendations in the short term that they were comfortable with, was this issue of timing, right? So I think, it's up to us to say, okay, we can push one of these forward, we can push all of them forward, but I think if we're thinking we want to be expeditious, pick what we want to be expeditious about and break it into parts. I think that should work. It's perfectly fine to do it in pieces, right?
Yeah, and that's kind of why I was focusing on 1 and 2. I mean, the language in here is very straightforward. I don't know that it needs much more discussion than what we're seeing in front of us in order to pass something on as a memo to the planning board and the county.
I would
So
agree
we-
with recommendation 1 also. I was thinking that was the auto-centric one.
Oh, okay, that's the self-storage thing.
I apologize.
Yeah. No, all good.
Well, I'd encourage 1, 2, and 4 myself, if possible.
Also happy with that?
And, I guess it's a race in a way, because as we talked about last meeting, it was about how invested the developer is, and
Yeah.
the point is we have to get this done before ground is broken. So we have to.
Yeah.
Right, so just to clarify that point, we spoke about non-conforming uses, those are existing uses. Any new uses would have to comply with zoning at the time that I'm sorry, let me straighten it a different way. They don't have vested rights to the existing zoning until they have, if you will, poured the foundation and something substantial has come out of the ground.
Yeah, and I mean, that's why I'm kind of pushing on these aspects a little bit, because they seem very straightforward. I don't know that they require a ton of workshopping. And again, my primary concern is making sure that the long-term vision that the Fishkill Avenue Committee, and I believe many members of this council share that overall vision, is something that we can actually do.
Yeah, I would urge caution on the fourth one, the auto-oriented. There's a number of uses there, and I don't want to be in the situation where we've legislated away stuff and we end up with empty lots for a period of time during our transition period. It seems to me that our urgency is not around that as much as item 2. I'm not worried about self-storage because nobody in their right mind would put in self-storage on land that valuable, but I don't have any problem with that restriction. So I would say I'm comfortable moving forward quickly on 1 and 2, but I would slow us down and ask that we be deliberative on the fourth one.
I tend to agree with that, mainly because I want the public's input on number 4. However, I think I can see the efficiency that if there was a proposal came before that we felt there was a need, like there is with some things with number 2, that we might feel a difference, but I'm okay with it being a little less efficient in the name of giving people more time to discuss and figure out, like we've talked about here. I also had a question about if we wanted to move forward with this, which it seems like we have enough people who do. I believe the zoning in Fishkill also exists in other parts of the city. I think it's general business, if I'm understanding correctly, and so I just wanted to make sure that we're clear about in this memo because we're not yet, and there are there's more than one type of zoning in the area that the Fishkill Ave Committee, so do we need to move forward with creating a zoning that is unique to this corridor, or is there a way to deal with the existing zoning, make the changes without then having an unintended consequence with other areas of the city that have that zoning that we're not intending to limit right now?
I had the same question as Molly, and just to add on to that, I believe, Natalie, you referenced this, that you were suggesting potentially separating wholesale and storage as uses. I'm referencing our use table, as well as it seems adding drive-throughs as a distinct use in our use table so that we can explicitly ban it.
Yeah, I think that's one way to do it, is to add right, self-storage would become its own separate use, because right now it's lumped in with wholesale. Drive-through is not listed as a use or an accessory use, it's only referenced within the text of the CMS district.
Right.
So I think there's, there's multiple ways that the council could decide to do that. I think adding drive-throughs as an accessory use to the table is probably cleanest, and then you can decide what districts that's included in or not. To your larger question, Molly, yeah, there's a number of zoning districts that exist in this corridor, and unfortunately, the council, we've been looking at one larger zoning district or potentially tweaks. I think the fastest way is tweaks to existing zoning districts rather than trying to, that's a map change, and I don't think the boundaries have really been drawn or agreed upon by the committee quite yet on that.
But I think
So-
I would agree with that approach, and I think it's straightforward, right? We amend the existing zones to reflect those that are short-term that we want to do quickly, and then when we're ready, and you've got a full set of recommendations, that will include whether to create a separate zone or to further adjust the existing zones in that area. And I think that's okay either way.
Yeah.
Right, and
Looking at
that's
the
what-
one other area of GB is along
Leonard Street.
Leonard Street.
Yeah.
There's one other area of GB.
Yeah,
That's
that's
what
not
I
a
was
problem.
going to mention, that like, in terms of the uses that we're talking about, I don't think there's anywhere in this city where I'm like, yes, that is an amazing place for self-storage. So I don't really, I don't have a concern with it bleeding into other districts. And I do think that this council is going to spend a lot of time on Fishkill Avenue in general, as we should. And so, like, I don't know, I just don't believe that zoning is ever written in, no legislation is written in concrete. Like, these are all things that we should revisit, but I encourage us to take a very, like, tactical perspective on what's in front of us now and how we feel about that.
So, sorry.
I just had a quick for Nick, like, if we were to do a local law, with the local law then, because I think our zone in general overlaps for the districts, HI and LI and GB. So would the local law then just identify the new language and address the four districts, that it affects only the four districts?
Correct. I mean, well, would it address the districts which we want to? I thought it was in the Fishkill Avenue along the GB. Are we also talking along the HI? So this is sort of one of the reasons why I would say we would bring it back for another workshop on the local law, is to make sure we have clarity, and also that when Natalie and I sit down, we think about the unintended consequences and something we may have overlooked. But I don't think it's a big lift at the end of the day to bring this back with a local law.
Yeah, I think our first step is to get a sense of where council wants to head generally, and then the next step would be put a proposal together we'll start to look at. I don't think we have time, we don't have to rush, and I think it's important that we be deliberative on this, so.
I will just say recommendation 1 and 2, those were from the committee, intended to be applied to all zoning districts along the corridor.
Okay.
That's the
Yeah.
language in there.
Right, that would be amending the table, basically, right?
Yes.
Right, that's
Yeah.
pretty straightforward.
Could we still do the memo to the planning board and the county without, what level of
it's-
specificity would we need before we're able to
Yep.
bring them in?
I didn't want to interrupt previously, but it's not a memo, it's a local law.
Oh, a
So we
local law.
need to
So
introduce
we
and
would
prepare the
need-
local law, and
okay.
it's the local law that they comment on under the law. Again, I think we can bring that to you in the next work session. It's not, give you a draft local law to consider.
Well, again, if we keep it narrow, it gets easier to do, right?
Right.
So,
Great. So that would be on the 10th, and then I think the planning board has their meeting the next day, but it sounds like it might then wait till the March meeting that they would have time to review it. Oh, I would defer to those who are part of the planning board, what works best if I guess we wouldn't have passed it, or, so do we have to then vote on sending it to the planning board, or does it come out of
And then wait.
workshop?
You do, yes. I mean, it
Okay,
automatically
all
goes
right.
as a matter of law. If you introduce the law, your code says zoning has to be sent to the planning board, so you're not voting on sending it, automatically goes there. But generally, it's not sent to them until you've introduced it,
Right, and introducing is a thing we do at our formal voting
when you schedule the
meetings.
hearing, right?
and then, Nick, I'd also like you to consider, do we need to say something about the comprehensive plan? I know it didn't say much, but it was basically saying, we're eliminating uses on Main Street, and we're expecting they can be in other parts of the city. We're now starting to say, they shouldn't be in other parts of the city either. So would you just consider if we need to do anything there?
Yep.
Thank you.
Are we able to, just seeing the direction that this is heading in and the way I think the council is aligned in trying to move this forward quickly. Is there a way to give the planning board a heads up and ask them very nicely to please look at this in the February meeting if we can introduce the local law instead of waiting until March?
We have done that in the past where we've introduced something, we've given them a heads up, and then once it's introduced on the 10th, they then amend their agenda and can consider it on the 11th. At times, they've been able to work it in. At other times, they've said it requires 2 meetings, but at least they've started the discussion.
Okay.
And again, they control their agenda, so they can decide if they wish to add it or not.
There is a public hearing scheduled for property over that way for an applicant for the February meeting.
Then I would really not want to wait until March. I understand they control the agenda, but I would love for us to encourage them very nicely.
Yeah, I don't think it would be that hard for them. There was a meeting where the Fishkill Avenue folks came to the planning board, and there was a discussion.
Planning board has seen this memo.
Right, so they're familiar with the topic.
Yeah, and so it shouldn't be hard for them to weigh in. They kind of weighed in then as well, right? So I think we'd just be getting that
And in
opinion.
fairness to the people that have applications pending with the planning board that does include drive-throughs, I think this is a good opportunity, maybe, hopefully they're paying attention
Yeah.
as well.
Yeah.
So I have a prediction and a data point. Prediction, the self-storage that is already in existence along that corridor will get sold and built into housing in the next dozen years, simply because it's far more valuable. As long as the building can be converted, that's the prediction. And then on drive-throughs, I just have this incidental data point, which was I was with the high school seniors in the participation in government course earlier, I guess last fall, and I asked them, the group of seniors, what they thought of a Dunkin' Donuts with a drive-through on Route 52. That was about 90% positive. Now, I think the primary reason was not the drive-through. Maybe some of them have their licenses, but I think part of it was something affordable. I think that's,
Sorry.
yeah, I'm just saying, I think that's a consideration. It's just a data point. I don't think it alters what we're doing.
Just,
I was in that meeting too, and my recollection was the emphasis was on the food, not at all the
Yeah,
drive-through
exactly.
aspect. I don't recall the drive-through part coming up at all.
I think the ones that had licenses would have been excited to both get cheap food and drive to do it.
Well, they'll be happy to drive wherever
Right.
when you have a license at that age.
Yeah, but I think it's the cheap food.
and
Right.
just one clarification on the scheduling, little wrinkle. So your next meeting on the 3rd is actually your agenda meeting of items
Yeah.
coming out of this. The 10th is the workshop, and the 18th is the actual meeting when you would vote to refer it to the planning board and schedule a public hearing. So the timing doesn't work with respect to having this considered at the planning board's February 11th meeting. But again, no one gains any vested rights or anything, and certainly they're aware of this board's discussion.
Does the planning board, so they voted on a public hearing for an applicant that might be impacted by this potentially. Does the planning board have discretion to ask the applicant to reschedule the public hearing? Or now that they've voted on it, as long as the applicant wants to move forward, they need to honor that?
Correct, they've scheduled it, so, again, I don't want to speak to the planning board's process, but once a public hearing is scheduled, it's being noticed, and the planning board, if they were to adjourn it, they'd have to have a reason to do so, and pending legislation wouldn't be a valid reason.
Okay. Yeah, I know they've rescheduled in the past, but normally it's because the applicant wasn't ready
Correct.
and requested that. Okay, all right, thank you. I mean, they can keep the public hearing open. So
Again, it's two separate processes, so I wouldn't want this legislation to influence that process.
Yeah, okay.
All right, so
We are going to have a public feedback session at,
The 15th, right?
it was scheduled for the 15th of February, but we've rescheduled it due to the holiday. So right now, Industrial Arts has made their space available to us for March 8th at 1:30 to 4:30, and that's the date as of this moment. So that will be Saturday, March 8th, and we'll have a open to the public. We hope all of you can attend, and we will have a presentation followed by sort of workshop discussions, table discussions with whoever wants to be there. We're going to divide up categories maybe into 4 areas and have people have a conversation, and then we'll have a summary at the end by someone representing the group. But that's sort of the goal right now, March 8th.
That sounds great. Okay, March 8th from 1:30 to 4:30
We're
at
making a
Industrial
flyer
Arts?
for it, so I can make
Okay.
sure to circulate the
Yeah,
flyer to
let's-
the council so everybody has that.
Yeah, that's wonderful. I feel like there's a lot of interest, so I hope that a lot of people turn out. And of course, this decision-making body has multiple opportunities for public input, especially as any potential changes we talked about today go through the process. We obviously would have a public hearing and other opportunities, so I hope we hear from people.
Yeah, and JC, to clarify, on March 8th, you're going to be presenting a number of recommendations beyond these 4 that were in this memo.
Yeah, we'll be touching on them. We're trying to touch on them as sort of conceptual, as light as possible, because this will be really our first major public event, and then we'll like to have enough time to have people respond to that. But yes, so we'll have it'll be a sort of an elaboration of what we shared in November.
Great. So, lots to dig into.
So it sounded like we have a path forward. Are we okay with asking Nick to draft on the first 2 items, to consider the 6-month issue, to consider whether anything in the comp plan needs to go with it, and to come back to us with something? And, you know, even if you're not 100% there, bring back the issues on those items? Is that
Yes,
all
we're
right?
prepared on our side. That's our understanding, yes.
Okay. Everybody good with that?
Yes, I just
Okay.
wanted to add one more thing after
course.
we're agreed on the 1 and 2. I just wanted to make a comment on the recommendation 3. While I don't have a problem with changing the front yard setback, to 10 feet, the parking in the rear, because some of these, the depths of some of these properties are less than 100 feet, that should be considered for parking in the back really would not be possible, I don't think.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that,
And it's bumping up
Pam.
to residential at that point, so
And-
maybe if that can be thought of.
Well, I think the idea is if parking can fit on the site, not to place it in the front. So if parking can fit on the site and you're building a new building, and there's even space for it, the parking's either going to be in front of the building or behind it. And I think the recommendation is, if you have space on site to put parking, it should be behind or to the side rather than between the building and the street face.
Right, and the side with camouflage kind of thing, with
Yeah, some
landscaping.
kind of, buffer of that. So
just
there are some shallow lots where they're going to have a hard time fitting parking on there in general, I think. But the idea is that it shouldn't be between the building and the street.
Yeah, on the west side, by Mead, the lots are typically about 85 feet deep, I believe. On the other side, they're over 100, I think, maybe 115.
About 125, yeah.
So it is a difference, and so we'll keep that in mind. Right now, I believe both sides are allowed to be required to be 15 feet from the lot line. So by making them 10, it's giving people more space to park in the back. But to your point, they're not the same, so we'll keep that in mind.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, because I think the general concept of the way you've described the setback makes sense. I think the distinction between the thinness of the northwest side lots versus the southeast side lots may affect what you do. It may affect what you put where. It may affect height. It may affect, how long something can be. And I think it's perfectly fine to say, I got different ones on this side of the street than the other side of the street. So I just encourage that, but I think you're going the right direction with that third one. And I would just encourage you to keep going in that direction. It's not timely for this group, so I don't think we need to worry about it. So you should consider it as a package and, don't be concerned to put all the pieces together.
I also wanted to flag something that I saw in the introduction. I'm glad that we've identified recommendation 2 as our top priority, and 1 as well. But I was surprised to see that on-street parking was within the city's right-of-way was one of the items under consideration. And I just wanted to vocalize from my perspective, from what I've heard, that I would certainly prioritize sidewalks and bike lanes ahead of any on-street parking. I certainly see the potential need for strategic ADA parking, particularly around access points, potential for bus pull-offs or a loading zone, but anything that's prioritizing personal vehicle use parking, I don't see fitting into my understanding so far of the vision.
So we're
Go ahead.
We're considering, you know, the corridor is about a mile long, and we've been studying all the varieties throughout it, and they change, right? There's places where it's thinner, there's different environments like at Mill Street, right, where you have the MTA properties right up against the avenue, and the public or the city would potentially have about 100 feet if the MTA relinquished it for public space. And in that location, the bike lanes on the rail trail are the most close to that part of Fishkill Avenue. So that, for example, that area could be an area where you have bus stops or some on-street parking, because if that open area does become a park, which we hope, or some kind of open space, which right now I'm talking about from Fishkill to where the asphalt of the Groveville parking is. That's not owned by the Groveville developer, right? That owner, that's owned by the MTA, which would then hopefully become under the city's use. So that public space, you know, could be, rather than make that into a parking lot, it could be left as an open space and potentially some bus stopping or some parking in that area. But in general, we're trying to see where bike lanes would be most urgent and most effective.
Yeah, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to add. So I think the priority is pedestrian, right? When you're thinking about complete streets, pedestrian comes first, right? Because you're always a pedestrian. Whether you're getting out of a car, getting off a bike, at some point in your journey, you are going to be a pedestrian. And so that's where on-street parking comes, is that it's actually been shown as a very effective traffic calming measure and a buffer for sidewalks and pedestrians, right? So I hear you when we're talking about like non-motorized access and pedestrian safety, the idea of thinking about cars in that can seem a little bit at odds, but the truth is folks will still be using vehicles to get to this corridor, right? The idea is to have them get out of their vehicles and walk the corridor, and on-street parking has been shown to be, not only it narrows your vision, it causes kind of friction on the side, so it slows traffic that way, but also provides a physical barrier. Which makes people feel more comfortable walking on the sidewalk.
Sure, and I can imagine that in certain locations, and that's what I am getting at sort of prioritizing who that parking is for.
Yeah.
But if we're in a narrow area and there's a choice between parking for personal vehicles and a bike lane, I think that a bike lane would need to be continuous and needs to be prioritized, but a few spot parking spaces where there is space. I like the Grove, the spot that JC was describing. I can see how that would make sense.
And then to the same point, landscaping can be used in the same way, right? Kind of with trees and things like that, landscaping can also be used as a buffer. And I agree, the ability to provide a continuous bike lane so you don't have bike lanes ending somewhere or not connecting smoothly is definitely a priority in bike infrastructure.
Yeah, I had a similar view to where Paloma went, and when I heard both of you say, that's how you slow the cars down, it was like, oh, I get it. And I've seen, JC, you and I have talked, and it's like certain sections, it would make some sense, because there's no way to slow Route 52 down. We put up, here's your speed, it doesn't work, right?
Oh, no,
it works.
It works. To a point, it works. It helps.
Compared to Walcott Avenue? I mean, it's by far our fastest one. So I just like the concept. And again, I'm going to leave it to you all because you're going to put the package together. You're going to do the prioritization. I get it. But I hear how that work can fit.
And my understanding of that traffic calming is that actually that variability, that sometimes there's parking, sometimes there's a tree, is also helpful. It makes people pay more attention. So what's on the sides of you as you're driving isn't just a blur.
Yeah.
I mean, the one thing that I was thinking, and I just kind of came up with this in the past day, because there is a lot of extra space that they've discovered on the side, which, even if we move forward in the future with bike lanes, it's not going to happen overnight, but is there a way to use parking on the side to at least use that space? So it's not just for those businesses that are people don't realize that these businesses are parking there, but technically it's in the city's property. So it could be looked at in the nearer future while it's kind of looking at funding and looking at possibilities, because there really isn't any street parking other than in the neighborhoods for anything on that corridor right now.
I think if somehow we could get someone to mark out the highway boundary along, I think people would become very surprised to see the corridor, what the corridor is.
Yeah.
I've been studying it a lot in the plans, particularly on the west side, not on the side closer to the creek. The west side has, it varies, but it varies quite a lot, from maybe 1 to 2 feet to 6 to 8 feet beyond what the current sidewalk is now. So in other words, the city owns property beyond the sidewalk on the west side that could become landscape, could have trees. It's not owned by the businesses. They use it because it's deemed as theirs. But
Now-
it is the city's property.
What I would suggest, and I would like to make a comment about the other half of the memo, right? So you all got both parts of the memo. The committee put together a memo on several items, and I personally just split the zoning one so we can have the zoning discussion. I'll let you know on the other ones, because we're touching on one of those, right? There were 3 specific recommendations. There were not zoning recommendations. One of them concerned litter in a particular area. One concerned the Mill Street crossing for pedestrians. And then the third one concerned the right-of-way on either side that we're talking about. Those are items that are for the administration to work on. I'm going to refer the pedestrian crossing one to the Traffic Safety Committee, see what they have to say. And the other 2, we will take up with our planning, our building department. We're a little shorthanded. One of them is an easy one. One of them's going to take a while, right? I mean, JC, you and I were looking at the right-of-way, and, tracks is 4 feet into the city's right-of-way, right, the building. Whereas the other side, it can be pretty clean. So that's, I think, something we can do over time, but I think I want to get the building department involved when they can and come back with how do you want to do this over time, okay? So I just wanted you to all hear that, because it was related to the topic we're just talking about.
And thank you for all your work and all your committee's work, and thank you, Natalie, too.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and
thank you.
we're very appreciative that you, I know we asked you to come, and it created a little bit of disruption, but this was about right. We're very appreciative. You can see where we're kind of heading. Go back and do your other stuff. Do your hearing. We're again and keep going on that. All right. Okay. Thank you all.
Thank you.
You're not off the hook yet, Natalie. Just JC. Is that all right? Can we go on to the next one? We're good?
Yep.
Okay. So the next one is, Natalie, you put together a memo last summer, mid-24,
Yep.
about potential zoning things that we could do for housing. I just put up the same memo again, and we can start that discussion again and take a look.
Yeah, and I can start with, I think, the ones that I remember that kind of rose to the top. I think the short-term one that we had identified was accessory dwelling units, ADUs, and looking at that code and seeing what changes we could make there to make that process easier. And then the other ones that came up was, we talked a lot about the targeting of city-owned and state-owned lots, and let's get a list together of what those lots are and kind of think about those strategically. Further restrictions of short-term rentals, that came up, as well as the inclusionary housing policy. Those were the ones that kind of got discussed. So I did, it's the same memo, I haven't changed it, but I did do, kind of to Amber's comments earlier, I did look into the ADU regulations and looked at that, compared that to some cities that are moving ahead on things like City of Kingston. So, in comparing our ADU law to City of Kingston, City of Kingston lists a max size of 1,000 square feet, which we also have in our code, but we also reference a minimum size of those units, which is quite small. It's a minimum size of 200 square feet. But City of Kingston has kind of removed, as they went through their code, they removed minimums for a lot of things and just kind of stuck with maximums. There's no parking requirement for ADUs in the City of Kingston. And then there was, I need to talk to Bartek, the housing commissioner over there, to get clarity on this. It did not seem to reference residency requirements. It talked about primary structure, like it has to be on a lot with a primary structure, and there are primary structure, but it didn't say the same kind of language in terms of owner occupied. So I just want to get clarity from them on how that's actually implemented. And then similarly, it looked like many of these could be deemed type 2 actions that would not require planning board approval, so that they could be done by staff. And again, City of Beacon has taken steps. If you're within an existing structure and you're not enlarging that structure or renovating that or expanding it, that again can be approved by staff. But if it's within an accessory structure, such as a garage or an old carriage house, or if you're expanding the primary structure, then that does kick you to planning board. And to Amber, to your point, you know, although it can happen in 1 or 2 meetings, I don't think the planning board's really slowing down that process in terms of those reviews. Just the fact of putting together those applications, you have to then have the you have to kind of get a civil engineer, you have to get the architect, they have to put the plans together, someone attends the meetings to represent you, there may be tweaks, so you come, you know, you make those revisions. So there is there is cost to that review. And I think the program that Chris mentioned is great. I love that they are including those costs within that as viable, eligible costs to use that funding for. But to your point, most of these structures cost at least $100,000. If you're buying like a already set kind of box, there's still $100,000 at least to build. So that 125 per unit will get used quite quickly. The other thing that Kingston did do, as you were referencing, is, funnily enough, they were part of this, of the similar program, the +1 that Chris was referring to. They actually were part of that in a previous iteration, and that's how they got their funding. And so they did also do a design competition where they asked for designs, and now they have pre-approved set of designs for a few different options. So those designs are there ready for people to download. So if you can kind of get those to place on your lot, it makes that process a lot easier for you as well.
Do you know if they charge for it, or if the architects who designed them charge for those plans in Kingston?
They are readily downloadable online. They're not the CAD files, so I'm assuming you would have to, I can ask Bartek about that too. I'm assuming you would have to get the CAD file so an engineer can kind of place that on your survey, on your parcel.
Yeah, it might still be cheaper. I think that's a model for other cities who have a similar program, that you still pay a fee, but it might not be nearly equivalent to what you would pay.
I wonder if they might have used some of the +1 funding to cover some of those costs for that design. I can look into that a little bit more. I think I started looking into the program when I heard Amber mention it. It looks like they had a competition, so I can see how those costs are covered.
Did people use all the funds for the initial funding that Kingston got for the ADUs?
I don't know off the top. I can ask that too. Yeah.
Curious to see.
But I think to that point, I think a lot of your ADU regulations are there, and they make sense, right? And I think it's just some minor tweaks to think about in terms of, often on these single-family lots where these are getting placed, the parking's not defined, so they have a large driveway, and they're like, yeah, we can fit 3 cars there, but then when you have that parking requirement, they have to start measuring those out, and they come before the planning board. So I think there's the thought of reducing the parking requirement or removing it as one potential, and I really think the process is the other one of removing it wherever you can, having it be by right. That's just especially for these single-family homeowners, that's not a process they're used to. So it's a whole kind of steps for them to take that could be eliminated.
I had a question for Nick. Can this be an area where we set the fees at 0?
It can, so as long as you're applying it to a category and it's not particular applicants, you could use this as an area where you modify your fees for the various building permit fees, inspections, electrical permits, certificates of occupancies. Yes, you could consider that.
Right, I would like to know what the building department thinks of that, but that might be another thing we could do in this area. I like in particular the ability, I'd love to get rid of the parking requirement, but also I think the way we set it up was if, as you said, Natalie, if the building envelope changes, you need a site plan, or if you're doing it on an accessory building,
Yeah.
you need a site plan.
Yeah.
I'd like to get rid of those if we could, right? That somehow we said there's a few situations where a site plan would be required, and then you have to go to planning board, but I'd like a lot of them to be up to the building department.
Yeah, for the modification one, you can tie that to like a percentage, right? As long as the primary structure is not being expanded beyond 25% or 20% or something, right? Like you could set a limit. So if it's a major remodeling of a primary structure, then maybe that ends up getting reviewed. But I think there's ways to ensure that most of these that are simple, simple, small changes to the structure, they're usually towards the rear, because that's also within the code, trying to have it kind of set behind the primary structure. That usually the planning board doesn't even have many comments on those kinds of changes, so you could save that approval process.
Interesting.
Let me ask council. I know we can go through other items on this list, but is this one where we'd like to kind of develop a proposal and move it forward sooner rather than later?
I wouldn't put it as my number one priority, but it's an area that I'm interested in seeing move forward.
Well, I think if we have that funding and that program established, we should be ready on all fronts and have this be as streamlined as possible so people can access that money.
That does increase the priority to me, especially, again, as I said earlier, you've got low to moderate income people. This is not an inexpensive thing to do, and if they're spending $20,000 on the planning board application, like that's a kitchen, like that's a lot. So, again, I don't necessarily think it's like, I would hope that we could do a couple of things at the same time. I imagine we're able to do that. But I think because of that program, I would just want people to get as much as they can out of it.
I agree with those points.
Okay. So what's our next step here? Can we get maybe not legislation, but a bullet point proposal? Would that be a next step, or would we try to draft something?
I think Natalie and I can speak offline, and we can consider if the next step is there like a decision tree memo where we need guidance from you, or if we think we have enough direction, we can just go ahead and prepare a local law.
I kind of feel like at least for where we are now, I feel like it's a little easier for me to personally react to more of like a decision tree memo and for the council to come to consensus on maybe certain points as opposed to having legislation drafted and trying to react to the legislation in this use case.
Decision tree memo's easier, so I like it.
Great.
Okay.
And I would also add, if there are any decision points where we expect the people who may be taking use of this Hudson River Housing Grant opportunity, we are interested in targeting making this process easier for them, if folks agree with that focus.
I do. Yeah. And then, I think in terms of other things, again, the council has kind of raised a couple of times wanting to have some additional conversations about the inclusionary zoning policy. And, the sense that I get, and just speaking personally, is what we have working the way that we want it to? So how have our current policies influenced housing supply and affordability? Are there things that we should tweak? And then kind of understanding, is there more that we should be doing here? So interested in other thoughts on that.
I don't know where this information would come from, but we often hear when we want to increase the amount of units or percentage for affordable housing, developers are saying that puts us over a break-even point, or we don't get financing and so on. I don't know where the information would come from, but I'd really like to see what the margins are for developers.
Yeah.
And understand what, when developer comes to us and says, we can't do it, or we're not going to build, I'd like to know if that's true, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's my exact question as well. My understanding, I think the quote in Natalie's memo is, we must recognize that affordable units have to be paid for. And so I would like to know those details about those margins, because if we are getting into the territory of offering tax breaks or some other form of incentive to get more units or lower rate units, then I would like those numbers to actually match and come from somewhere.
Yeah, you know, my only advice is there's not going to be a magic formula, right? The closest we've gotten, and we've gotten, you know, the folks from Community Preservation Corporation, CPC, is that the right?
Yes.
They've done, you know, I don't know, 100,000 units of affordable housing, you know, in a whole, all across the state. We brought someone from there who basically said to us, you have an unusual statute because you require 10% inclusionary zoning at 70% AMI with no incentive, meaning no give back. We did it without changing assessments, without a pilot agreement, nothing. And as you get closer to the city, and I mentioned this to Natalie, I think when you get to New York City, they have so much density, you might get a higher number. I think Yonkers might have a higher number. But again, they're building a lot of units at a time.
They still have 10%. They vary in terms of the AMI bands that you're hitting. So within that 10%,
Okay.
they do some like deeper cuts in terms of 40%.
Yeah.
I have their code here. So they are but they are still 10% overall, and they differentiate between large developments, medium developments, and small developments.
Yeah, so
That's really interesting.
So does Kingston. So Kingston also has projects 7 to 19, 20 to 49 units, 50 units or more, and then the percentage of the total affordable units, and then also the price points vary within those.
So,
Right.
all of those levers are ones that I'd be interested in seeing put into a decision tree memo, perhaps, for us to consider and make sure that we're getting the mix that we want. Because I am, you know, exactly as Natalie said, maybe it is keeping it at 10%, but getting more deeper cut, lower cost units, the housing study has told us that we need some of those lower ranges as well. I mean, I recognize that the band that the housing study told us we need the most are ones that we're not going to get through inclusionary zoning. We're only going to get through different programs, but I think moving in that direction is still important.
Yeah, the way we're going to get there, and I think this is a discussion, we should take our time to get our data to make an informed decision, because if I remember from the county housing study, because our heritage is as a small inner city, we have low-income projects in our city, and we've actually invested in doing the updates for them. And so we're going to have kind of deeply affordable units already. Our inclusionary zoning was targeted for what we called workforce. And as we've gotten more like Westchester, right, that's kind of where we used to be an upstate county, now a community, now we're more of a downstate county community, that workforce is an important component, and also, you know, is one that we should be targeting. So I think we should kind of think about what are our needs. Let's go to that study, see what's there, see what do we have, and I think that will inform this. I think we're going to end up saying, if we want to go to a higher number, we have to give something. My only advice to folks is we already do that as a fourth floor on Main Street. You know, we don't require it only to be housing, but we say you can get a fourth floor if you give some public benefit. I think that concept is the most financially viable way for us to create an incentive. In other words, don't give up tax money, don't reduce assessments which reduce tax money. Instead, give an extra floor. I personally think that Route 52 is a really good area to consider that. It's only in the areas where we're looking at multifamily, which means, you know, all our single family is off limits. We've already dealt with Main Street. Maybe we should be looking at, you know, providing a fourth floor in return for that first bump. If we can kind of demonstrate a higher percentage, could work. Right? That would be my 2 cents. And again, not suggesting we decide any of this. We should get all the data on the table, have a very informed discussion.
Speaking of data, I would be interested in, there are some New York State tax incentive programs, and I'm just curious, and there are a couple of, there's more than one of them. And I'm just curious if there's anything that we could be doing in our zoning or how we encourage development to help developers make use of those programs. So we're incentivizing them to build things because there's a path that connects directly to these programs. I appreciate that's a very broad statement and category. I don't have the detail to know much about them or if there's a way to figure that out, but that's also an area, if there's something we discover, like, oh, if we did this, this would actually make accessing these programs easier. I would be interested in that.
Yeah, the one area that we can do something, when we get to the list of projects, it's sitting in the back of those projects, would be either trying to advance the county's site building something, right? Because once it's publicly owned, you can target it and the cost of acquiring the land has gone away, right? You kind of throw that into the mix to make it work right. The other one is the city has several parking lots or lots that we might also develop. That's in our to-do list, that's a couple of years out. We might want to discuss those as possibilities, right? They're not on the list right now, but you'll see them at the back of the list of things we might tee up over the next few years.
Yeah, in that category, that was one of the buckets that Natalie introduced us with, the city and state-owned lots. Are there next steps with any of those pending projects that, as a council, we could or should be taking?
So just the county one put out that request for expressions of interest, right? We've got our hands full, so you'll see it on, I got a list of all the stuff we're working on in the next topic, and then in the back are what things might we be teeing up over the next few years. It's in that category, and we're looking for prioritization of the council. We're not going to jump and do them instantly. It's going to take a couple of years to do something like that. But that's where we should have that discussion, all right?
Could we talk about the short-term rentals?
Sure.
That'd be a good time. I'm just curious as to if there's, since I was gone for a year, what kind of updates we have on the enforcement?
Chris, you might know some numbers. I want to say that the identified short-term rentals in Beacon, based on ad counts or whatever, was 100 plus when we passed it, and it's now under that, like maybe 50-ish, but you might have a better number off the top of your head, Chris?
I haven't looked lately, but I don't think it's gotten that low.
Okay.
It's been a bit of a game of whack-a-mole. They go up, they go down. We're arguing about under the law, there are certain provisions that allow you to say you live there and you're renting it, and we're seeing people abusing that by gaming it. So you have somebody that and you lease the apartment to them, but they live in Florida, and they're renting it on Airbnb, but it's technically legal. So it's been tough. We've gotten about 35 or 40 of them licensed. As you know, they're going to start to be taxed when we start collecting our tax in April. But again, we've had conversations at a staff level, like it might just be easier to ban them. But I know there's unintended consequences there because you may not have enough rooms to serve demand. Clearly, they're meeting some kind of market. But I did meet with one of your hotel owners who owns a boutique hotel, and she's having trouble competing with them. And she said there's like 100 within walking distance of my facility. So that's one of the things, unfortunately, like as we have the transition, that's one of the things we're going to slow down and for a little while in doing, because it's very intensive. We are identifying them and we're trying to knock out the ones that are illegal, but the financial benefits of somebody doing it, the penalties aren't high enough to dissuade them from doing it.
And we're still using that organization to gain?
Well, we use an app. It's a Granicus AI software that identifies them on the sites, and then we issue letters. But by the time you issue a letter, they've already been able to rent it out for months.
Has there been any communities that have been successfully enforcing this, or? Are there any other ways to do it that we're aware of?
Everyone looks to New Orleans as like one of the, I know it's far away, but they created an entire division to like over 50 staff to like monitor, right, to monitor Airbnbs in that city, and they had 3 different typologies. And without doing that, I think to Chris's point, like it becomes very time consuming and staff intensive. A lot of communities have gone towards banning. I can look into that in terms of like who, but I'm sure enforcement is going to be a #1 issue for many of the communities. That
I know
try to
the
regulate.
state just passed a regulation for them all to be registered.
Right.
I don't know the stage of implementation. I'm sure it's some time off because they have to develop the rules for how that works.
Right, and that registration is just for tax purposes.
Right.
Yeah.
But there would be penalties if they didn't register, that the state would apply and enforce, if that were the case.
I don't know if there's an enforcement provision, I would imagine so, but again, it's only for tax purposes, not for local zoning.
I mean, I think we're controlling it to some level, but not enough. It's really energy. I mean, we could have a staff person doing that all the time. So if you don't want them, then ban them. But then you're going to have a lot of people who have invested money in these units. But I think there's some people openly doing it who, given time, will get them. But again, we have to choose every day what we're going to focus on.
Yeah, so I guess the conversation is, we should begin speaking about it as possible banning and what the impacts of that might be.
Yeah, or maybe some in between. Years ago, we zoned out bottom floor apartments on Main Street, and somebody had just invested in the West End in those, and we gave them 5 years and then had them amortize out, after which you couldn't do it. So maybe there's like a ramp down or something. Maybe you limit the number. I don't know. There must be other municipalities that have come up with ideas.
Nick, can you help remind us? I thought our law said that if you live in your own home or whatever residence, you could short-term rental out a piece of that or all of that, as long as it was where you lived. But if you had an accessory unit on your lot, that had to get a long-term rental.
That is correct, yes.
That's true.
And so I would just be careful if we're going to, because I think we've gone that step, and a lot of other places haven't, of if you've got 2 units and you live in one, you can't short-term rental the other. You can only short-term rental your own.
Correct.
So I think we may want to visit how we write the law now, what the issues are, and what options there might be. Because I don't think there's any problem if someone really does live in their home and they're going away for the month of June, they should be able to rent it out, right? But it's the how you get around the
How to
law.
distinguish them from.
Yeah, that's,
Yeah.
yeah.
Exactly, right?
Right.
Yeah.
All right, and then the one that I heard that we don't allow, and I thought it's a pretty good argument for why we should, is I've heard a situation where it's a family living in the place, they have an accessory dwelling unit, and, a parent comes, 2 or 3 months a year and stays with them. But then what do you do the rest of the time? You can't do a long-term lease in that situation, and that one struck me as a legitimate reason to want to allow it, but it's not their main unit, it's their accessory unit. So I'm not saying that we should allow that, I'm just saying that was the one I heard that's like, oh, that was a pretty good argument, so. How do we want to proceed on this? Do we want to get a package together that we can look at of, here's what the law says now, here's what we know about enforcement, here's what maybe a couple of other places have done?
Yeah, I think it's key is other municipalities and what their experiences are and updates on what.
I think, though, you're going to find, we can do that, I think you're going to find that enforcement is difficult, and that a total ban is what works, or totally permitting it works. Sort of this in-between, it comes down to regulation, and it's very time-intensive.
Is there could we gather information from local municipalities that have banned it and see what kind of pushback and what kind of experiences they had?
Is the timing a little tough right now due to our building department
Well, we were going to have Bruce come to a meeting before April, and then just a few days later, he submitted his resignation. Now,
Yeah,
I
we
don't
scared him
know if
off.
those are actually connected or not. I'll let him talk about it. He's only here for a week and a half, so I don't think he's going to be able to do it. So I think we're going to have to, the local information we'll get when the next person's in.
But I think I agree with George's direction when we do have the capacity to look at seriously what it would look like to ban them entirely, if these really are the two main options that we have. It's not a decision I think any of us would take lightly, but I think it's worth consideration.
But wasn't it happening when it was banned? And that was the problem why we came up with something, that it was happening and there was nothing really that could be done.
Yeah, I mean, I think enforcement will be an issue regardless. I think part of what was also confusing at the time was that there were sort of conflicting policies on the state and city level, like the city had allowed it, but the state didn't, or the state had allowed it, but the city hadn't. Someone correct me, I may be being totally apocryphal right now.
No, so there were several iterations of this law and enforcement, and when we initially enforced it through the building department, there was conflicting views from New York State as to how it would be enforced, and they didn't agree with our interpretation of what was permitted in a dwelling unit was not necessarily consistent with how the state viewed it through the state building code. But then we moved beyond that and adopted the local law that you implemented.
Right. I hope we come up with a better solution, but if we're going to seriously consider it, it seems like that's what we should consider.
Yeah, I would like to hear more, but I understand timing just isn't right at this moment.
So what I would suggest is we wrap up this particular topic for now. We say we're going to come back with some information, but it's not happening for a few months, right? I just want to set some,
One question. Nick, could you
Expectations.
look at whether we could cap them?
Yes.
Could we say there's 40 allowed, and then we say, if you have one of these, you come and get it licensed, or we pick a number, and then anything above that, you have to go through a process later on to get. So that way, you have your licensed ones, and you know everybody else's, you can go at.
And it would-
Yes.
And it would be a
Yeah.
lottery of sorts?
Well,
I don't know, I would give precedence to the people that have done the right thing and already licensed them.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like that idea.
And just to clarify, in terms of tabling and not revisiting for a few months, are you referring to just the short-term rental aspect or the other pieces that we talked
no.
about? Because I think there's some
Yeah.
things that we can get to sooner. Yeah, okay.
yeah. Just the short-term rental.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, I think what we said was we're trying to move quickly on the Route 52 stuff. Then we can start to do broader, deeper discussion on
ADU
the
decision tree.
ADU we thought was pretty quick, and then the inclusionary zoning will take some effort in putting material together. This one might take a little bit longer because we may not have the resource in building department for help.
Okay.
But let's, we'll kind of keep you posted as to where we are. Is that what's okay with council?
Yes.
Cool. This is really good. Okay. Do we want to take anything else on this list, and we can pick it up again
Yeah.
if we want.
I wouldn't put it as a priority ahead of anything we just said, but I was curious, Natalie, if you could say more on, as a planner, how you define smart growth. There are quite a few interesting ideas under that bullet point, and I'd like to just give some context for why those might be priorities.
Yeah.
Sorry,
I
as
mean-
you were
No, that's fine.
scribbling
I
through your
should
notes.
have backed up. I remember that I defined this the last time, so I was just pulling out my notes there. So,
Yeah.
I mean, smart growth in the same way that you'll get affordability defined different ways, you'll get complete streets defined different ways, right? There's many iterations it can take, but in general, the tenets of smart growth are mix of building types, compact design, range of housing opportunities and choices, walkable and transit supported, preserving open space and critical environmental areas. Again, that kind of comes in with, if you have compact design, then you can protect the areas that need to be protected. Directing development towards existing communities with infrastructure. And then development decisions are predictable, fair, and cost-effective. That was my notes from the last time in terms of...
This is all sounding very familiar.
Yeah. In terms of kind of what you think about with smart growth.
And how did you, sort of with those definitions, how did you come up with these sort of 5 bullet points of how we make that actionable?
Yeah, so, I mean, if we want to go through, so permitting 2-family homes in single-family districts, again, this is kind of looking at compact development, right? Not just Beacon, many communities, the majority of the land area within that community are designated to single-family homes only. So there is consideration of, is there a way, it's kind of like a increasing soft density, right? In terms of where there's only one, can there be 2 units? And you're doing that a little bit with your ADU units as well. But I think there's a general trend of looking at that. Again, it's existing sewered, infrastructured area. Is there a way to increase density there in a soft way that respects like the context of the neighborhood and the community? Again, looking at updating higher density zones tracks directly with more compact development. Increased development near public transportation. Again, identifying, where there's already infrastructure. And then again, multifamily comes back to the density. So all of those, and smaller lot sizes. Again, it's kind of just trying to make more compact development where there's already kind of the built form and the infrastructure to support it. So those all really tie in with that. You're essentially just trying to prevent kind of sprawl. So a lot of times it's going up rather than out, or allowing for smaller spaces to be, or large spaces to be better utilized.
I think the one area that we discussed, besides the ADU piece, and I can give you a data point, it's in the comprehensive plan, of the land that we have in the city that is for residential housing, almost 80% of it is R1, meaning single family, right? A little bit less than 80, like 75-ish to 80. And one of the options we're talking about is the ADU. That alters that. And I think it's really appropriate because if you look at our census data, we increased the number of housing units in the city in the last 10 years, and we didn't increase our population. And that's because our average household size is declining, and that the areas that were traditional single-family home areas actually have fewer people in it than they did 20 and 30 years ago in terms of per capita, right? And so the ADU actually starts to kind of bring it back to where it was. We could go further and go to 2-family zoning. The other option, and Molly, you know this, is to consider maybe possibly areas that are single-family that we might alter and allow denser, and that would be around our Main Street.
Yeah.
And I think that's one we might want to talk about, right?
The transition, with the transitional district as
Right.
well, right?
Yeah, so extending that idea, but not necessarily that literal zoning.
Right, right. And that might be an area that we could talk about without saying, we're going to alter all the single-family neighborhoods, but rather only the ones closest to Main Street that we might consider. Right?
Yeah, I'd be interested in doing that. I also feel this is an area where, as we have the comprehensive plan process that's likely to kick off next year for finalization the following year, that might also be an area, because it impacts potentially a lot of the land in the city. And so thinking about both where we might want multifamily within single family, and this idea there might be areas where we have larger lots outside of the center where we would be okay with smaller lots, still single family, but not necessarily the size that we have now. And so I think those are all ideas that I would really want the public to weigh in on. And so it's not to say that precludes us from having the conversation here, but that any decision might be best suited for that comprehensive plan process.
Yeah, I would just say I want to compliment this conversation. I think this is a great conversation this evening. What I'd like us to do, if we could, is if we can keep moving on some of these, we're effectively starting to define components in the comp plan that might be changing. And if we can get some of them done,
Right.
I think it kind of sets up that work.
Right, the council could have a memo, just like the Fishkill Ave Committee, say, here are the things we think, and then the
And here are the ones we've already
comprehensive
done,
plan committee,
and
takes
here's
that
things,
up.
that we might want to do, right? Because if we spend enough time doing kind of planning and looking at the long term like this, I think we could set that up pretty well.
And I just want to point out that when we talk about this turning R1 into possible 2-family units and so on, that's a return almost, because that's the way it used to be. So it's going.
Right.
back to
And
what
it's a
was
way it
there.
is organically around, certainly where I live and where lots of people live who are closer to Main Street in that sort of central district, closer to the train station.
Yeah, I would be very curious to sort of see that old map and understand which buildings and which neighborhoods may have been built as multifamily homes but become single-family homes and may already be set up to go back, as George said.
Yeah, I mean, it's some of it's that, but I think to the mayor's point, some of it is just there was household sizes used to be multi-generational and larger
Absolutely.
and include staff as well as the members of the primary household, right, all living under one roof in one shared space, and we've just moved away from that as a society. But I think we can look, again, that would be a building department intensive kind of exercise to look through those files to see what was historically multifamily.
And maybe that's a red herring, and it's about looking at what exists now from another perspective, but it's something I'm curious about.
Well, one of the areas we're clearly starting to go back to the future is on our Main Street, right? Because the 1960s and 70s comprehensive plan said, oh, get rid of those three-story buildings. We're going to compete with the mall. We're going to have a, walking Main Street, single-story buildings, and you could see some of that has occurred. And we're kind of undoing it, right? And we're bringing 3 stories back to Main Street and sometimes 4. So there's a few areas where I think we can do it. I think the outlying areas of the city were built out as single family because they were done in the period of time where that was what everybody thought was the right thing to do, right? We're building Levitt towns or whatever you want to call them, right? So. Okay on this? Any other one we want to pick up? And we can come back to some of these. We're teeing up a few that we're going to start bringing forward. We can come back and pick up some more. In fact, what I would suggest is maybe in somewhere time in the next month that maybe we all sit down, Nick, Natalie, Chris, me, and go through what else is in this memo. Might we want to tee up another 1 or 2 along the way and deal with them a piece at a time? Is that okay? Right, we're not trying to let any of them drop as much as picking some to move forward one at a time, okay? Do we want to pick up is this okay on this zoning stuff? Do we want to pick up the last item of business, or are we getting close to time?
I think we should have a tour of what it is.
Yeah, that's what I was going to suggest is let me take you through what's in there, and then give you all a chance to digest it, because there's a lot in there. Is that okay?
That would be perfect.
Great, okay.
Thank you, Natalie.
Good.
Thanks, Natalie.
Because I'm going to blow your minds if I'm going to ask you to prioritize, right? So, thank you, Natalie. Okay. So, first of all, let me tell you the thinking behind this. The thing you got to know is these are projects. These are not day-to-day. And if you asked me, and I've asked this of Chris and Ben, like, if just take, call it administration. Administration is the mayor part-time, the city administrator, and the mayor's assistant, a dumb title for Ben. I would argue that 80% of the time is spent doing the operational stuff, and that projects are maybe 20% of that time, and we're making it up, right? We don't really know. But this is a list of projects, okay? And what I did, I put it together. Chris and Ben have looked at it. We think we're in the ballpark. There'll be changes or whatever. But what I tried to do was to say what projects are teed up. The starting point was the capital plan. And so everything that's in this year's capital plan is listed in here. There are items that were in prior year capital plans that the work hasn't been done, but was already approved in the capital plan, right? So that it doesn't add up to just 1 year's capital plan. Then it's organized by which department is in addition to the administration. So figure column D, I think you don't have Excel, you've got
Yeah, we don't have
Okay,
these.
the first column that says admin time is how much of either Chris's, and it's mostly Chris's, Ben's, or Lee's time are we talking about? And it's kind of listed as high, medium, low, because we're making it up, right? Then also, oftentimes, there's a department that has to be involved. So obviously, the projects involving construction involve the highway department, and how much of their time are we talking about? And then the next 2 columns are, if it's somebody else's money, where is it coming from? If it's our money, is it a capital item or is it in our operating budget? And then, how much are we talking about? And there's two columns. One, other people's money, which we like a lot, and the other one is our money, right, our taxpayer money. And so that's how this is structured, and it's done in groups, right? Then as you get to the back, we're done with all the things that we're teeing up this year or the next couple of years, and there's things that we want to stick in the hopper, right? So in the back, I think there's 52 items before you get to the back, and then they start again numbering in item 101, right? And we tried to tee up things that we've talked about, aren't teed up yet, as things we would want to discuss. All right, so what we tried, so and I'll give you an example. The very first item is finishing Fishkill Teller Avenue, right? We've teed it up, it's in our comprehensive plan, our capital plan. There's still it was an $8 million project. It's all somebody else's money, which we like. We just have to finish it. It involves a fair amount of Chris's time and a medium amount of the highway department time. That's how to read this, okay?
And Lee, can I just clarify?
Sure.
It's not just my time and Ben's time. We also bring in the city engineer on every capital project. That's a limitation. Your legal team is also involved they look over every bid, every contract. If you look at our park ones, we're going through various procurement processes for those. So those are the limitations. So that support staff is vital. And then the other element is finance.
Yeah.
Because they have to do a purchase order for everything. They have to track the invoices. For the firehouse, we've had well over 100 invoices.
Right, and so those are kind of too hard to kind of document or whatever. So this was an attempt to say, let's try to do a list of the items, some sense of what we're talking about in terms of expense, who's paying for it, when is it getting teed up to get done, and who's got to be involved besides engineer, lawyer, finance, all right? So if we look down the list, and again, we don't have to make any choices. I'm just trying to give you a lay of the land, and then I'd ask you just take a look at it. The first one all involves sort of projects of general size, but they get smaller as you get toward the bottom of that first 19. Those are all the highway department. As you get close to the bottom.
And Parks Department. Mark is managing the recreation.
Oh, is that right? It's not Mickey? All right,
No.
so I should have split those out. But as you get.
But again, Mickey has a role, and also then Ed helps with locating sewer and water infrastructure.
All right, and those are people who have full-time jobs, so there's only a certain amount of capacity that they have to help this along, right? So as you see in like 16, 17, 18, there's a set of work that we're doing on City Hall. Exterior painting, interior painting, reconfiguring the clerk window. Those are largely going to be done by internal staff, right? We're not going to hire out for those.
Are the chairs in there? I'm kidding, Chris.
They are.
I'm with you. We should make that a separate item.
They're coming. They're coming. I've sent staff shopping already. I've like, go pick out chairs.
Right?
Yes.
I love it. No, that's all right. The police item is somebody else's money, right? Because those are vehicles that we're getting funding for, right?
Yeah.
I want you to see one in particular, which is under water sewer, it's item 24. We had applied for a Melzinga Dam grant, which we did not get. We were surprised because we thought the reason we were told we didn't get it didn't make any sense. But we checked. Chris said, hey, I don't have to do that this year, and we want to move it from our money to somebody else's money, right? And we think waiting a year is worth doing for that, right? Because it might get a couple $1 million of grant. And so one of the choices that we make, we want to show you some of those choices, is delay to get somebody else's money as opposed to our own. Now, the other thing to note about water sewer is, remember, those aren't tax dollars, those are the water and sewer fees. Now, you could argue, we should try to keep those as low as possible, but it is different than raising the tax. Mind you, these are also items we have to bond, right? And so they go into our bonding total, and we bond a lot. That's the only thing the rating agency has told us is a ding for us, is that you bond a lot. Although you've got the capacity, you've got a great general fund, but you're at the higher end. So we just need to be careful there. So I want you to see those. Then there's, after you get through the capital ones, there's a set of operating type of projects. These are smaller, right? Because they're not in our capital plan. And as you kind of go down the list, there's also some involving planning and zoning. And these aren't our decisions. These are pieces of the puzzle we would be asking someone else to do, right? No, some of these are ours too. So one of the ones that are teed up under planning and zoning, the first one is the speed limit reduction study. So the council said, oh, we want to do that. And so we took our time and we got it funded by somebody else's money. That's
I'm
county
sorry,
money, right?
It's not funded yet.
It's not funded
No,
yet?
we have to apply
Okay.
at the next funding round.
So we're hoping to get it funded from somebody else's money.
Yes, and I've spoken to them, and they think it's a very good project.
Okay. But that's kind of how we try to tee these up, is we get the list, try to figure out what it's going to cost, try to get somebody else to pay for it, and then that's our list going down. Once you get to through the ones, there's a future projects section. That's the one that I would suggest we spend some time talking about. And if we want items to come in here, and they're all, to be determined in terms of how much are we talking about, but some of those ideas we have talked about. Do we reconfigure the Churchill Street intersection with Main Street? Do we reconfigure the East Main intersection with Main Street? Those are not on our lists. And I think we're all going to say some of these are important. There's also new ones, like, in your budget that we approved, we talked about some kind of a complete streets type of grant. I broke them into two and said a sidewalk master plan, a bike master plan. But this would be the area that once you digest this, I would suggest we talk about this section here and what kinds of things are important. We won't have absolute answers, but we'll, as a council, get to, these seem to be important. Let's see if we can price them, figure out how to get someone else to pay for them, which ones are higher priority, which ones are lower priority, okay? That's what we were trying to do here. Does that make any sense? And is it a decent explanation?
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense, and I think it's really helpful to see some of this laid out. I think this is probably something we should kind of keep as a working document and build on as things progress. But this is a very helpful view of all the things that are going on in the city, as well as for us as we go into budgeting and capital planning, to make sure that we're advancing those future projects so that they can actually get done.
Yeah. And just so you know, I was on council for a number of years where our 5-year capital plan was a 1-year capital plan.
Yeah.
We've now gotten ourselves to 5 years, which is what we should be doing. But you all recognize that the 5th year in that plan is all if come maybe, right? And we don't know how certain that is. This will be similar to that. The list of things that we're working on will be pretty clean. Some of them will take more than 1 year. It's this list in the back of what are we trying to tee up? And, the thing I would say by doing it this way is to encourage you all to say, oh, it's not going to come instantly if I just put it on the table, it'll get done. There are other things we got to work. We have to figure out how it fits in, how we fund. Okay?
Yeah, it seems like being a spreadsheet, which are just lovely, you can always add columns. Based on your description, it'd be nice to see the planned horizon for when these are going to get completed. It'd be nice to see what the anticipated, the hoped for, as part of that conversation. Ideally seeing we hear Chris describe this all the time, that there's so much going on, but
Yep.
seeing comparative columns in sort of a Gantt chart way, so knowing when these projects are sliding about would be very helpful.
Yeah, we actually talked about, are we going to try to say, what's the Gantt chart look like? How many quarters are we talking about for this one or that one? That was just getting way too speculative. I actually did a version of that. But I think what's more relevant is this bigger picture for now, right? This, as a council, I think is the right level for you to kind of see this issue, okay?
I guess though, to Jeff's point, the detail that goes into a Gantt chart, I don't know that I really necessarily need for each of these, but what might be helpful is like a target start or a target completion to at least give us an idea of like, this one's in progress, this one's, we're not working on it for 2 years.
1 through 19 are all this year, with the
Okay.
exception of the Main Street Visitor Center bathroom. I'm not sure what that meant, Lee.
Are we were redoing them? Or are they redone?
No, they're,
You're going to make it access to the public.
we've thought about maybe having an exterior access at some point. I think that's further off. But everyone on that is already underway and either going to be completed by the end of this year or mid next year. With, like, the longest one we have out right now is the dewatering replacement at the wastewater treatment plant. So all of those are pretty close.
Okay.
It's great. It just
and-
helps us answer questions, too. If we just see a bar or start and stop date, we can answer questions that
Yeah,
people ask us, so that would be lovely.
This was, most of the first page is this year.
Like I said,
we-
but even within this year, seeing the start date, when it's picked back up, when it's finished, and then we can see where they sit next to each other.
Well, I think it would be even simpler than that, just be able to say this year, right? We're going to finish it this year. Good enough. Right? Because then you know what's coming up. I don't think you need to know what month, right? I think it's just we're doing these this year.
And some of them are going on right now. Interior painting is happening. We're still processing paperwork for Fishkill Teller, which is going to resume at the end of March. We're putting together bid documents right now for the park with Keenan Bean. So a lot of these are moving already.
But I hear that piece of input, and I think that's an easy one to kind of get a version of it there that works. Okay?
It's nice just to have an understanding of the capacity, how the planning is done, the resource planning, so when we ask for something else to be done, even just seeing this year in more detail, how projects sit next to each other or don't, because of the capacity and the timing or the weather requirements, it helps us in the planning for the future discussions.
So we'll meet in the future and talk about the future projects that
The
we want to
backlist,
add?
yeah, that would be
I've
my
got a couple that I
suggestion.
could add on immediately.
Exactly, and we don't claim to know them all, right? And I think as a group, we should be looking at those. And I don't know exactly where they fit in. Some of them may end up in a capital plan, some of them may end up in a budget, some of them may end up, we're talking about them and they don't get teed up for a while. But somewhere we pick them up in a discussion. Is that all
It's
right?
also, yeah, and I also think it's important that the public be aware, that we're aware of some of these things, because they might be like, isn't that happening, or why is that happening?
Yep.
It's good to see it prioritized and at least being considered. You know?
Yep.
Yeah.
All
Yeah,
right.
thank you.
Okay?
One item that isn't on here yet, that I know we talked about as City Council for our budget process, is communications. And I just think as we kind of have these discussions, having that just be an item too that we bring up with what do we mean by that? What do we want to do this year and future years? So just as a specific
Yeah.
item that came up.
Yeah, I think that's fine.
It's also missing the comprehensive plan.
Yes, we have a little time for that,
Yeah.
right?
Well, some of these are several years out too, so it's
Yeah,
a
yeah.
comprehensive
Yeah.
plan.
No, agreed, right? And that's what I said, it's not a complete list. It was just us trying to figure it out, like what's on our
Just teasing
calendar.
you 'cause it's
And
the
there's
same
no,
problem.
there's no sub-indication of priority within this list necessarily.
Correct.
1 to 19's all have, but I mean, that would be helpful too. It's like, to some degree, I know it's not easy and clean, you can't do it all, but some indication of what the priorities and what's being put off because you're going to look for another grant, that would be helpful. And again, I want to see more on timing.
Okay? All right.
Motion to adjourn?
And before I entertain that, any other thoughts or comments before I entertain Amber's motion?
Can I just ask what you're thinking with the 114 housing developed parking lot number 1?
Yeah, so we had talked about eventually looking at city-owned lots and doing some sort of project there. So it's basically saying, don't know which, don't know when, but we had talked about it.
Kind of going above it.
Yeah, so
okay.
one option has been where the police parking lot is, right in the notch where Main and Beekman and 9D of Woodweed built something there. That was one. Another one was the 2 lots on Henry behind Main Street, right? Don't know which, we talked about it. It was in the Main Street Access Committee, but there's no advancement. And I just put it on the list as I don't know, but we should talk about that, right? And if we think it's important, we should spend enough time that we get it into some queue if we think we know how to fund it. I think the best example is going to be the county and their DMV lot. I'd like to see what they're doing there. That might give us a model to work. Okay?
Okay, thank you.
Amber?
Motion to adjourn?
Just announcing your next meeting date?
next meeting.
Yep.
Oh, yes. Before we do that, the next meeting will be on February 3rd at 7 o'clock. All right?
See you then.
All right. And all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All right. Thank you all. Okay.